Welcome back. Today we're going to be painting a miniature from the Moonstone game, the Fire Spitter in this case. I love the aesthetic of this game. I'm keen to buy the whole starter box, but before I commit to that, I wanted to see how these models paint up. I'm really drawn to this aesthetic, and it's an opportunity for me to get away from 40k and diversify a little bit, paint something different. So join me, let's get to it. I'm Dan, you're watching The Hobby Void. Okay, so this is not a sponsored video. I bought this in the UK. It was about £20. I think it's about 25 US dollars. Really heavy box, glossy, really nicely made. Nice thick foam there. I'll use that for something. And a data card for the game. Really, again, really heavy card, laminate, like a plastic coating on it. Really nice quality. Okay, so the model itself, it is cast resin. So it's not plastic, it's resin, but it looks really clean. Very little cleanup needed here. I can't see any gaps or bubbles or anything like that. Looks minimal preparation required. I can feel some mold release on there though, which is a lubricant used to get the cast out the mold. So we're going to have to give that a scrub off. A little bit of dish soap or washing up liquid in there. Good scrub. A rinse. And that means the paint will stick to it when we prime it. Again, minimal cleanup, just to get rid of those mold lines. Because it's resin, we'll use super glue here. Sticking it to some temporary bases. So I'm not too sure what I'm going to do for the main base, and those two little characters are quite tightly packed, so we want some space. Okay, so we primed it in black. Now I'm not using slap chop or underpainting here. This is a light dry brush in white to help me see what's on the model, because at the moment that is a big black mass and I'm struggling to actually see into all those little details. So this just helps see what we're painting, but yeah, it preserves those black recesses, which is really nice because again they're very forgiving when it comes to sort of creating shadows. So just a very light white dry brush. I'm not going to be using too many transparent paints here, so we're not going to get that slap chop type effect. It really is just to help me navigate around the model. So using contrast paint Wildwood, but again this is not, and as a neat paint, this is not very transparent, but it just flows nicely, and I love it as a general dark brown colour. It goes on really well, covers great in one coat. So we'll just get that barrel blocked in. Not really getting a slap chop effect here because that's not what we're going for. We're going for a more traditional paint style. Okay, Mournfang brown. So I've decided the shoulder pads are going to be like a bronze colour. So I'm going to do some non-metallic metal, i.e. we're not using metallic paints. I'll talk about this a little more later on. So we're going to build up from brown through various shades of orange and yellow. But for now we're just going to base coat the model. Now if you wanted to, you could just paint these gold if you prefer metallic paints. This is just a skill that I'm trying to push myself on. That cork was driving me mad as well, so I've switched to a Citadel painting handle. Bright Pyrrole red, purple and coal black from Pro Acryl. I'm just making a bit of a dark plum mix to base coat the overcoat. We'll highlight this into more of a red later on, but I wanted that base coat to be a bit darker. You could go for something like corn red if you had it, or like a darker plum colour. We'll do the little goblin friend in the same type of uniform as well. Give them a little bit of coherency. Now, experimenting with some purple shadows for the skin. The skin will be that traditional green colour, but I want to try some purple shadows. So we're going to base coat, taking some of that plum colour and adding a little bit of the green to it, just to give me a very sort of, I suppose, a lilac colour on the skin, which will only act as the shadows. We will be painting that green. Now, because I don't know my way around this model particularly well, I'm back and forth with the same colour. So I'm deciding as I go along where some of these colours will go. So we're just blocking in the rest of the brown. And again, we're going to do a non-metallic metal type finish on the barrel, on the metal part. So I'm using grey just to start thinking about where I want to place some highlights. And I'm going to place 3 highlights, and that means there's 3 sources of light, one at the front, one at the back, because I'm thinking there'll be action in both directions, and then one on the very top, which will just be the ambient light source. So just putting some grey in that will build up to white later on. We're just laying down base coats for now. I'm just deciding where those highlights might be. I'm sketching them in. So as I say, that's the light from the sunlight which is coming from above. So because I'm a fool, I didn't record adding the first highlights to the shoulder pads. So I'm going to talk you through them. That's Scrofulous Brown, followed by Fire Dragon Bright, followed by Ice Yellow from Vallejo. And we slowly add those colours onto the shoulder pads. Now I'm going to show you on the flamethrower in a minute how we did that. And we're doing exactly the same thing. Also on the feet as well. Just going to apply some verdigris to the shoulder pads to just reinforce that they are metallic and they've got this bronzed, aged look. We don't want this to be gleaming gold. I'm just using an aquamarine colour here. I actually prefer this to some of the specialist verdigris paints out there. I find there's a lot more control. Just into the crevices, so it's almost like the armour has been polished, but it's left the verdigris in there. Okay, so here's our flamethrower and our non-metallic effect that will build up in layers. Same for the shoulder pads. So we started with Mornfang Brown, going in with Scrofulous Brown from Vallejo Game Colour, and we're just picking out those raised areas. Now, because this is a sort of small, quite detailed piece, I'm not too worried about light direction. I'm really just looking at hitting the raised areas where the light would naturally catch. So we're just building up this in layers with a really kind of thin paint. It's not quite a glaze, but it is well thinned down. You can see it's quite thin. I'm just using a really small amount of paint, and I'll probably go over each area 3 or 4 times. Now we're moving on to Fire Dragon Bright and do the same in smaller areas, leaving some of the other colours behind, and then we're going to finish off the real points just with some of the Ice Yellow, just to really get those sharp edges. Again, go around a second time, just build them up until you get that effect. Looking for contrast, we're looking for dark and light to exist very close together. Just a final highlight of Ice Yellow mixed with a little bit of white, tiny little dots just on the highest corners. And there is our sort of bronze effect, flamethrower head. And that's exactly the same as what we did for the feet, the armour on the feet and the shoulder pads. So on the dry brush, we're preparing some Orange Oxide by Pro Acryl, getting most of it off the brush, and I want to use this to give us some what we call object source lighting, or OSL, from the candle that's in front of the barrel. So we're going to just dab this. We're not dry brushing as such, we're just more stippling but using a dry brush because it gives a nice soft effect. Just adding a touch of white into there now to intensify that patch that we've added just in the centre to make it look a little bit more sort of bright in the middle. Like the candle is lighting the barrel. We'll add to this later on and tint it a bit more orange as well, but at the moment I just want to get the values there and just give the impression that there's light coming from the candles. So we're now going back to our green, starting to just put the first, I suppose, base colours, because the purple's really a shadow colour. You could also argue this is the first highlight. Just start to pick out those details on the face, covering probably 80% of the face, just leaving some detail, some purple in the recesses. Again, using really thin coats and going back 2 or 3 times just to build up that colour. Now added a small amount of the Vallejo Ice Yellow into that mix. Started to highlight again those, you know, the upper areas that catch the light more, the end of the nose, the cheekbones, the jawbone, the lip, leaving some of the original green colour behind. And this will give us that 3D effect, that contrast, make the face appear more interesting. I had to use my magnifying glasses here. Which is a very pale sort of bone colour, almost white, just to pick out the teeth and the eyes. Appreciate it's quite difficult to see on camera. Just bracing the hands together to be super steady. Got both my elbows on the desk and my hands are braced together to form a triangle of sorts. I just find that's the steadiest position to avoid handshake. Okay, so that's most of our base colours on. Okay, so we'll use the dry brush again with some of the orange oxide, and we're just going to start very light strokes against that wood grain on the barrel, just to give us a little bit of texture on there. Don't worry if this goes on the metal bits, because we're going to be working on those shortly. Just want to make that wood come alive a little bit. Tiniest amount of paint on the brush here. Very, very light strokes just to build up the colour slowly. Adding a small amount of white into that mixture. Again, most of that off there, testing up my hand, very, very little on the brush. We're just going to do the softest, the dry brushes, just to really catch the most raised areas, just to heighten that effect even more. That wood has changed from that dark brown wildwood contrast paint colour to a really kind of textured wood finish now. See all those grains. Now I'm using some Japanese uniform Could use a similar dry brush colour, but I wanted it just to introduce a little bit of something different. So we're watering that down quite well. Just checking on the brush how that's coming off. It's just flowing nicely. And I'm going to do some classic edge highlighting using the sculpt to help us. And this will really make those pieces of wood stand out. Again, you can skip this step if you're quite happy with the dry brush. I'm just really trying to take this to the next level. Give it some further definition. It's following the sculpt. We're not going across the grain in any way, we're just using the edge of the boards. Tiniest touch of ice yellow in there. Ice yellow is a really nice colour to add to your original colours as a highlight. It's a nice alternative to white because it retains a little bit of the saturation. You can just see where we're picking out some of those grains. They're really standing out now. I think at this point I'm quite happy with that wood. Again, it's not hyper realistic, but when placed on a tabletop it allows us to see those details from a distance. It's really what I feel sort of fantasy miniature painting is all about. Again, just use the sculpt to guide us. We're not freehanding any of these edge highlights, we're just resting the side of that tip against the natural contours in the sculpt. I'm just zoomed in a touch there so you can see what I mean by that. Okay, and we'll call that wood done. So we're going to move on to making these metal hoops on the barrel, and I know there's a proper name for them and I can't think what they are. Making them look a bit more like metal now. So I've just added a very small amount of white to the original grey colour, and I'm going to with very thin coats start to build up those highlights. So again, I wanted a highlight at the front, which is there, one on the top, and then one on the back. And in between those highlights, we're naturally going to let the grey, the original sort of undercoat colour, just that can stay there. We'll work these lighter colours up almost to pure white, and we'll start to see that effect come together. This does take a long time. Again, if this is not something you want to do, just coat it in your favourite gunmetal colour, something like lead belcher. So we're going higher up the scale now. We've got more white added to the mix. It's not pure white, it's just a light grey at this point added to the mix, and you can start to see those highlights coming out. Don't worry about blending at this point. I'm going to go back in a minute and do that and just make them, soften them up. So that's what we're doing here. I've turned it into a glaze. I've added more water. It's a very, very thin glaze. Back to the white, or the whiter colour. It's back and forth until you're happy with the result. You do need some patience for this, beyond what you'd normally need for normal miniature painting. Start to see a bit of a shine appear as if it were metal. It's still quite crude at this stage, but you can start to see the effect growing. And as we go lighter and lighter, get shinier and shinier, it will become more realistic. Or rather, we will trick our eye into thinking it is metal. artists and oil painters have been doing for hundreds of years. They didn't have metallic paints when they'd paint a knight or a monarch in battle armour. It was all done with, obviously, non-metallic paints. How the light is placed and how the contrast is presented is what, again, fools our eye into believing it's metal. Again, this isn't a video on non-metallic metal or NMM. There's lots of videos out there on that by people who are far better at it than I am. You can do a search for those. Might do one in the future, but it's still something it's still a journey I'm on to improve. Okay, I'm just glazing now to blend the different shades together using super thin glazes. Back to the highlight just to bring it up a touch more. Again, it's this back and forth, back and forth. Again, seeing that shine develop now, starting to look more like metal. So the highlights at the front of the barrel, some of that will be from the candle. And in my mind, some of that is from, you know, the light sources and the battles and things that are going on in front of this model. Potentially something it's just set on fire with its flamethrower. Just doing this sneaky little other highlight lower down because it's going to be holding another candle in its left hand, and that is where I see that reflecting. Just on that one side, on the character's left shoulder, because it will be holding a candle in its left hand, as well as the ones on its helmet. So I'm trying to think, where will these light sources come from? And glazing in with a little bit of very watered down grey just to smooth out the transition. Okay, so we've taken our original plum colour that we mixed and just added a little bit more of that light purple and a touch of white. Just wanted to raise the value of it here slightly before I go in with the red. Just because the red will pop a little more. So we've added some red to the brush. I've not even washed the brush, with just a little bit of that red into the mix now. Very thin, almost glaze-like consistency. Just to tint that fabric, and so it reads as red, but the shadows are more of a purple colour. And orientate the model to work for your hand. Don't try and twist your hand to work for the model. And so what we'll do in a moment, we'll add a little bit of Fire Dragon Bright into that mix as well. We'll build up certainly those edge highlights a little further. Just a final glaze of red, just to really sell that as a red colour. The brush looks quite loaded there, but that's a super thin consistency at the moment. So a little bit of Fire Dragon Bright in there. You can see the orange just starting to come through. Just warm that colour up a little. leaving those darkest of colours in the recesses, again to give us that contrast. And there's the jacket done. Now the Tiller light will just go back in with a little bit of Fire Dragon Bright, just to highlight that cut in the jacket. There's a final pop of colour. You always hear me talking about contrast, but it's just about pushing that contrast as hard as we can, beyond realistic. Again, so it looks good on the tabletop. So Cabalite green on top of I think the base coat was the Wildwood again, just as a general brown shadow colour. So I just wanted a dark green just to pick out this this material that is wrapped around the body of the model, attaching the frame that holds the barrel to the body. Again, just following the natural contours. No heroic freehanding. There's just a small amount of the aquamarine colour we used for the verdigris earlier on, added into that mix. And again, we'll just touch those highest and sort of sharpest areas as a final highlight. I don't want this to be too sort of dominant, so we won't go any further than that, and we'll leave it there. It's just the green's a nice contrast against the red. It gives us a different type of green on the model than the skin. So we've added the arms in now. Just super glue those into place, and I'm shading down the rope again with some Wildwood contrast paint, watered down. It's a great paint. I just love the way it flows. Okay, some bright orange artist's ink. Now, I'm using an airbrush for speed. You can do this with glazes with a brush. You don't have to use an airbrush for this. I'm doing it purely because I can do it quicker. It's convenient. And I'm doing very, I mean, you can barely see any ink coming out of there. You just see the colour start to build. We're tinting the values that we've already put down onto that barrel and around the candle. Again, let's not forget the little goblin friend with the bellows. Picking out the rivets and the handles just with a little bit of very, very light grey. And there's our two models done. So the skin on the small goblin was done exactly the same as on the big one. Just working up from that purple in the deepest recesses up through the greens into the yellows. So let's figure out where we're going to get them on this base, and this is why I didn't want to do the base initially. I wanted to paint them separately and then figure out how they're going to go, because there's a pipe that connects them, so we need to make sure we get in this position right. So a little bit of cork board, you can buy this really cheaply from art supplies, really useful for basing. A little bit of activator, just for speed, get that super glue setting almost instantly. Hundreds of different ways you can base things. I'm just going for a general kind of rocky, muddy, sandy, with a few tufts of grass sort of base. Slate chippings here from my garden. So I'm using a general artist sand texture gel here, but you can just use a sand and PVA mix. And if I've managed to keep this shot in the frame, you'd be able to see that I'm using my tub of various bits of grit and sand, all different sizes, and I'm sprinkling on top of that gel as a glue. I'm now just imprinting the feet of the model where I want them to be, so I know that they're going to lie flat. Okay, this is dried, and we're going in with some orange oxide, heavily watered down, just as a general red sand colour. It's not going to be this red when we're finished. This is purely the base colour. Just touch up those rocks. Good old Agrax Earth shade, liberally applied as a shade, and it will sink into all those recesses. So that's now dry. Back to Japanese uniform for a dry brush, quite a liberal, heavy dry brush. Catching all the raised areas. Give us some variation in colour. Add a little bit of a shabby burn. Again, I'm not cleaning the dry brush, I'm just letting it naturally go a bit lighter with some of the original colour on there. And we'll just catch the very tops now. It's a very light dry brush. Again, if I kept it in the frame, you'd see that. Purely for some colour variation, some Poxwalker shade, just a green shade. I'm going to dab that round randomly in patches just to break up the brown, give us some patchy brown and green earthy tones. Some dirty down moss. Again, you don't have to do this, it's just I happen to have it. I quite like this product. A little bit of moss and algae type look to some of the rocks there. When this dries, it has quite a nice effect. Again, just to give the base a little bit of interest, a little bit of variation as opposed to all one colour. And then we'll get that rim, paint it black, or whichever colour you choose. I like to do them black. A lot of people prefer Steel Legion drab. And we'll super glue that on. So I'm going to use a variety of grass tufts. Again, just add a little bit of interest. I'm using a little bit of PVA glue just to make sure they stick. I find that the self-adhesive nature of the grass tufts doesn't always make them stick, particularly on the rougher surfaces. And there's our finished model. I hope you like it. It was great fun to paint this Moonstone miniature, and it has definitely sealed the deal for a starter box in the near future. If you liked the video, give me a thumbs up. If there's anything you want to see in the future, for example more non-metallic metal or object source lighting, let me know in the comments and we'll get it done. Don't forget to subscribe, and thanks for watching.